All right, so I thought I'd make a video kind of now that I'm having my little moment in the spotlight with Paul featuring my that clip on from the conversation on his channel, and Chris put it on his the video that Paul shared, and then Christian Golden made a response video about it too, about what I was saying about my litmus test for determining who's going to be my friend. And so, I think I'll respond to some of what you said first, because, don't forget about the sports guy. Well, I do like sports, and I have been very blessed to witness a lot of great achievements amongst the teams that I follow. Um, Growing up in New England, I am a Red Sox fan and a New England Patriots fan. And I basically told someone recently, I'm retired from being a football fan because, there's not, I don't think there's going to be anything like the Tom Brady era of the New England Patriots. So, I've seen my team win and lose more Super Bowls than most people can hope for in a lifetime. And the Red Sox, I do not follow them very closely anymore, but I will. I was very happy to see them win 4 World Series at various points in my adult life, and I'll definitely watch if they're when they get into the playoffs again, because I do enjoy watching baseball as far as a social experience goes. So it's not that I'm above sports or anything. Interestingly, I mean, my dad wasn't really into sports too much, and this kind of thing that I was talking about, like how do I, like, oh, this, I guess this will be the video that somebody can watch if they want to be friends with me. And it's not because I'm trying to, um, create a high barrier of entry for others, um, because it's not about who I will be friends with. I'll be friends with anybody who wants to be friends with me. But the the friends that I need, you know, the friend that you need needs to know you and understand you a little bit. And so that's what it's more about. And I think a lot of this stuff that we talk about goes back to personal stories and things like that. And my I guess now is the more appropriate moment for Paul to feature something that I said on his channel, because I kind of thought, like, I would get some status or whatever, and like, if anybody saw today's Grail Country chat, I shared a little bit more. That the I've seen the YouTube experience as a means to community building for a long time, and for people who aren't able to find like a little corner like this, I talked about. I started watching woodworking videos. You can see all the stuff behind me, and in the spirit of authenticity, I have not dusted off any of this stuff or removed any of the clutter, because in as much as Jordan Peterson talks about cleaning your room, the reality is that any flat surface will gain clutter in a workshop, and I'm too busy with more important things to just keep it clean. So um, at this moment, it's not a priority. So that's all the junk. But I started watching these YouTube videos partly to grow my skills and learn how to do things and learn different techniques and things like that. And then some of these channels, a couple of the guys had a podcast where they would talk about the creative process and things like that. And this was really cool when this was happening. I was very blessed in the job that I had at the time, because I had a workshop available to me, and whenever there wasn't a specific task that somebody needed me to be doing, I basically had free reign to just try and figure stuff out and mess around with things, and whatever materials were laying around, I could repurpose and build things and be creative. And so listening to other guys talk about that was really fun. But of course, with any of these online things, podcasts and stuff, people like that. They like having that conversation in their ear because it makes you feel virtually not alone. But at some point, you want to go beyond that. And there's a lot of these channels where people have like Patreon accounts, and then people can pay a certain amount of money, and then maybe they have the access to a members Q&A or something like that. Very rarely are you going to get the kind of access that like somebody like Paul opens up his channel just to chat with anybody, but you do get some access. And that is a very appealing thing, just in the sense of you have this thing on YouTube where you search for specific stuff, and so then anybody who's making the thing that you're specifically interested in, it's going to be kind of like finding that unique person who sees the same thing as you. Or it may be somebody that argues, and in this area where there's a lot of discussion about thinky-talky things, maybe there's different opinions on certain religions, certain philosophers, authors, books, movies, ways of doing church. And so sometimes you get into arguments with people, but the chances are that, there's one person that you disagree fundamentally on every single thing is pretty low. So you can usually find a common interest with somebody, and I think about Jacob, and he and I have different religious views about things, but we are pretty aligned more on the more political level, or at least generally speaking, and then same goes with other people. There's always certain points of agreement and certain points of disagreement, but that's kind of somebody that doesn't have any points of agreement, it's pretty tough to be their friend. And I guess as a Christian, it doesn't mean you shouldn't love them. You should still love them, because even if that's if you consider that to be an enemy, you still love them. And even an enemy may be somebody that you agree with on some things, or potentially an enemy could be somebody who you agree with on a great many things, but there's some critical point of disagreement where your worldviews are not compatible, or your path forward is blocked by what they're trying to do. So as I think about this, I've been going through a lot of things, just going over my past, and even when I first came on Paul's channel, I can put a link to check that out. I was very concerned about putting a good spin on things, and not I was concerned about some of the people who might have been watching, that I wouldn't want to hurt their feelings, and I still wouldn't want their feelings to be hurt. But the trade-off in me trying to be charitable as possible was that I didn't allow myself to probe some of the pain and the depths of the hurt experiences that I had. And that's not it's not like that's a necessary thing all the time or whatever. But I think there is something to that kind of thing. And I can't remember if it was in that same talk. I know Paul put most of the stream on. I think it was. Paul put most of it up on his stream. I didn't finish listening to it because there was another live conversation to jump into. But I talked about, we're all kind of in this position where we grow up and we think we grew up in a normal home, and then we encounter other people that thought they grew up in a normal home, and but their experience is very different than ours, and ultimately you find out nobody grows up in a normal home, and everybody has weird stuff and messed up stuff. And parents are better and worse, for sure, and some of them are more more intentional about how they do what they do, and when that's the case, it's definitely easier to forgive them for their mistakes and their shortcomings. And so, in the grand scheme of things, I would say like that's definitely the situation I found myself in, and I had really great parents growing up, but um, but they had some weaknesses or inadequacies, and they weren't necessarily aware of it because, like I said, they were trying to do the best they could. And I'm not saying any of this from a position of judgment. A lot of this is in recent conversations I had with my mom and my dad about some things, and I realized, I made some assumptions about how they grew up, and I didn't know all the stuff about how they grew up, and so then we got into that conversation. And uh, as far as like my background and stuff and the thinky talky stuff, like I think I have smart genes, and my dad's side of the family, uh, his older brothers are both very successful in business and uh, science and academia. Some of my cousins, all my cousins went to private schools, expensive private schools. Some of them have gone on to become professors, PhDs, a couple of them, and they're all very intelligent people, and that's the genetic, branch that I came off of. But my dad went on a very different trajectory from his brothers, and it's interesting how parenting, the best parts of parenting and the worst parts of parenting both have strong effects, or sometimes what's lacking is what drives children forward. And for whatever reason, that my dad had a little bit of a different experience because he was about 10 and 8 years younger than his two older brothers, and they are, so he was the baby for sure. There's a big gap there, and he was the little brother. He talks to me about how in a lot of ways, like his older brother, Michael, was his best friend, and he passed away. It was on the day that my wife and I got engaged. My uncle passed away, and I think like, yeah, I had texted my dad and let him know, and he shared it with his brother, and then he was, and then he passed away later that day. Um, so that's a little bit of a sad day in some regards, but overall, happy for what came out of it. And uh, kind of mirrors the experience of how my wife and I started dating, because we were friends for a long time, not really close, or we didn't. I didn't. There was some back and forth. She had a crush on me. I kind of knew it for a while, and so I avoided her, and that hurt her feelings. And I didn't realize that it was hurting her feelings because I was just trying to do the right thing. And eventually, we kind of figured things out, and we were friends, and we were coworkers, and it was all good. And then her mom passed away, and when that happened, I realized how much I cared for her, when I saw the pain that she was going through, and that kind of caused me to look at her in a different way than I had before, and ultimately led to us starting to date and get engaged and married. So, there's always tragic things that are unavoidable in life, but the testimony is that God can bring something good out of that. He's the one that does that. And I guess when I think, going back to the conversation I had with my dad recently about his upbringing, I had written some things and kind of had thought about this, and I guess I had some resentment towards my dad because why his life was on a different trajectory than his successful older brothers is that he had an experience, an encounter with Jesus, and became born again, and that set his life on a different trajectory. and it was connected to him meeting my mom, who had a less extreme conversion than him, but no less important. Um, and my dad had gotten into a lot of trouble, and I didn't know the extent of it, but he was drinking pretty regularly and experimenting with some drugs and um, having some encounters with occult things and a lot of like really crazy stuff going on and battled depression, and he was considering committing suicide, and then he had enough sense from his Catholic upbringing to know, and this is such an interesting thing because is this a bad teaching? It's like I don't know. I wouldn't say it's necessarily true, but the Catholic Church taught that to commit suicide was a mortal sin. So if you commit suicide, you go to hell. And that scared my dad enough to not seriously consider it, even though he felt depressed enough that he wanted to end his life. Um, but then he had a friend who kept inviting him to come meet these people or whatever, and he did, and he had an encounter with Jesus, and that set his life on a totally different path. And the context of our conversation was he had said something about how I was raising our kids, and I kind of sent him a message back. It was a little bit resentful and like, Dad, I don't, I know you're however your dad raised you and what like based on what you did as a dad, and like I said, I'm not saying my dad is a bad father. But I'm not like I don't care to have your opinion or specific advice in this instance. Um, and I said, and I told him some things about like, here's some stuff that happened that really hurt me when I was a kid, and you didn't know about it, and I forgave you, and it's okay, and and because I realize you did the best you can. And like I said, I've heard so many more people talking about really messed up stuff from their parents. And my dad was great. He's a great dad. He did the best he could. He made some mistakes. Mistakes are inevitable, and so I'm more than happy to forgive him for his mistakes. And relationships are better when you make a mistake and then you forgive the other person than they are if you never make a mistake. It's a paradoxical thing. I guess that's what's at the heart of the gospel. It's why God allows us to run off and do our own thing, because he wants us to have a little contrast um, to evaluate what it means to be loved and what the love of God is like in comparison to an absence of it. But like I would say, I was very fortunate in that I've had to have only small doses of that contrast in my life. Um, but nevertheless, like I had some challenges growing up, and I think some of this was from stuff that goes way back. So what I'm talking about is I more or less said like, Dad, I was frustrated because I'm really appreciative that you emphasize to myself and my brother and my sister that like knowing Jesus is the most important thing. And that was all my dad cared about, was that we would know Jesus. And and it was a little strange, I would say, to grow up with parents who experience that in such a radical way, because I understood what they shared with me about the gospel and what it meant, and I was like 6 years old or whatever, and I said a prayer and accepted Jesus in my life. And so I grew up like basically my whole life believing this to be true and knowing the Bible is true, knowing it's reliable, but not really uh, feeling the same way about it as my parents or a lot of the other people in our church who had also come to faith as adults, often out of experiences with things like alcohol and drugs or whatever. And I always got the impression like you kind of have to mess up and screw up your life, and then you kind of come back to God, and it's awesome. And I thought like, well, that parable where Jesus, or when the guy complains about the woman anointing Jesus' feet with the oil, and he says to those, to whom much is forgiven, there's much love. The greater the forgiveness, the greater your love and your appreciation. And I guess I kind of thought like, well, I guess I'm gonna have weak love for Jesus because I didn't have a big colossal mistake to be forgiven of. And eventually I kind of slowly but surely, over many experiences as I grew older, God revealed to me that the burden of sin is not something that only drug addicts and alcoholics experience, but it really is something that we all bear. And this is something that some people might call like, this is the piece of shit theology, that you're a piece of shit and you're not going to do anything good without God, and he's so great. And like my brother-in-law, I think he still views it that way. But I think eventually why I see it as good news is because you realize that it's not just drugs and alcohol that God needs to forgive people from, or premarital sex, or whatever. But, God is privy to every thought and imagination and secret desire of our hearts. And when he saw me fight with my brother, and then in my mind imagining what it would be like to literally kill him, even though I was never going to actually do that, but the imagination was there. Or that when I was first exposed to pornography and realized that the way I thought of those women in my mind was absolutely not a way that I would want anyone to think of my own daughters now. And God is privy to all of that information, and he knows what's going on, and he knows all the little stuff in between, all the lies, all the bad attitudes, and the disrespect. And I did plenty of actual bad stuff or whatever. I broke some laws and broke some rules, and all the stuff that's normal, everyday stuff that people does. But when you realize that God looks at all that stuff, and it's one thing to say, Jesus would go to the cross to take the place of another murderer, but that he would go to the cross because you have angry thoughts or lustful thoughts or whatever, like, you realize that your debt truly is more than you could bear. And at one point I remember, I had the experience or whatever, and the peace that passes all understanding, the reality that the love of God was absolutely real, and it didn't matter whatever my circumstances were, that God loved me. And that changed everything. It changed everything. But nonetheless, at a certain point, I got a little bit. Over the years, I always bore a little bit of frustration over the fact of like my parents didn't really push me into going to college, making sure I had a secure career. They actually let me go to this ministry training school that was overall, like, kind of looking back, kind of a money grab, not a very good education, not a very good not a super beneficial experience, and it wasted a lot of people's time because it basically, most people ended up just going to 4 year college after 1, 2, or 3 years there. So it just set people back. It didn't really equip people for like jobs in full time ministry or anything like that. And and that was the thing. I had come to the conclusion that yeah, Jesus is the most important thing, and serving Jesus is the most important thing. And so the way you do that is by working for a church and doing ministry stuff. And so that was the path that I pursued. But then I found that while churches are usually really grateful for the effort that you put in to helping their church grow and their ministry to flourish, they don't usually prioritize paying employees as far as a use of funds. Because if people are willing to work for less because they're working for the kingdom, then they can use that stuff for a bigger projector or better lights or more mailing campaigns or social media stuff and websites and things like that. And so that's kind of the way that a lot of church budgets are structured, is to prioritize outreach and evangelism and all the other things that a church can do with money other than paying people, encouraging them to get married, encouraging them to buy homes, to have kids. And so after a long time, my wife and I, which was kind of it was a whole crazy circumstance that we ended up getting married. We were 30 years old when we got married, and we had a kid when we'd been married, I think, 5 years. Yeah, about 5 years, 4.5 or so, and then we had the opportunity to leave to go with my family and move to Texas. My parents were moving down here to retire and to be closer to my brother and his kids and his family. And so we moved with basically no money except for what we could get for selling stuff off. And we had no jobs. We had a house to move into that my parents had bought. And we had a 5x8 trailer with all of our stuff in it, and a dog and the baby. So 1 car, 1 baby, 1 dog, and a small trailer full of personal items, not even furniture really. And we were 35 years old. We were starting from scratch basically, and it's kind of tough to figure out like what do you put on your resume when you've just worked for like a random church that paid you minimum wage for less than 40 hours a week, even though I was working more than 40 hours, because they provided housing. And I didn't have the earning history to apply for a mortgage. I couldn't secure a job. I didn't really have a path forward, and the one thing I knew is that I didn't want to work for a church because, as far as I was concerned, like that was just too messy. Trying to have a real life while working for a church was just too messy. So, I was fortunate that I found a job, and it actually only took me 1 day of searching. Spent 1 day putting out applications for all sorts of different things, anything I thought would possibly I could be good at, or that I could kind of convince them, even though I didn't have necessarily the exact right experience or credentials, that I could do the job. And I ended up working for a company that I'm still working for now, and they work on kitchen cabinets, and so I learned a little bit of a lot of stuff I was familiar with doing, but learned it in a different way and a different context, and I've had an opportunity to grow my skills a little bit more. And fortunately, because it's so much cheaper here, we were able to get some loan assistance from a first-time homebuyers program, and do some other things, and find a home. And at this point, there's not much I can say that I don't have that I really wanted for my life. But um, I I guess I was still kind of resentful because I didn't because I had to figure out all this stuff on my own, and that was like why I was a little bit resentful towards my dad. Like, why didn't you show me how to do this? Um, and honestly, he didn't model it because my dad lived a very modest lifestyle because of his beliefs and his commitments. He became a teacher. He had a master's degree in education, and he was, for a small time when I was young, he was a principal at a Christian school, and then he was unemployed for a little bit. He had some odd jobs. He used to sell used cars. He wasn't really good at it, but he had the friend who owned the dealership let him work there, and he would he brought more people to Christ than he did sell cars while he was working there. Um, and then he did some handyman jobs, and he would take us along in the summertime, and so I'm grateful that I learned how to do some of that stuff. But I don't think he knew how to. He didn't really know how to bill people well, so he was kind of always giving people a favors, and he was making. He was probably working for way less than he should have when he did those things. And at some point, he became a pastor. He kind of just inherited the job when our old pastor at the small church we went to left, and he stepped in, and he was there for so long. Eventually, they figured out how to like join a little congregational denomination, and then he got credentialed through there, ordained by the people there in the church, and he was there for like 25 years. And so the whole time, up until we moved when I was 35, my parents lived in the parsonage that the church owned, and he got a little money on top of that, but that was like basically the big part of his job, his earnings from there. And up until I was like 19, he worked for private schools. He actually taught at Catholic school for a long, long time, and didn't make much money. And he made more money in the like last 10 or 15 years or whatever working at a public school than he ever did the rest of his life. And it was enough that he was actually able to pay in and get a partial pension when he retired. So it worked out for him. But my parents didn't even get to be homeowners until they were in their 60s. And so I guess I was a little bit resentful because I didn't have the experience of being pulled out of the muck, drug addiction or alcoholism or anything like that. I had this experience that was novel it was unlike what they had of growing up in a Christian home. And they taught us that Jesus was the most important thing, but there was some like missing stuff, and like so a lot of it was how to be a person, honestly, and like how to communicate. And this is kind of the thing I got into recently, talking about it more. Like, so my dad's dad, his father died when he was very young. It was 1919 in the Spanish flu, and so he grew up raised by a single mom, and I think that I only kind of thought about this recently, and my dad had never really even thought about it, that his dad grew up without a dad. And so everything that he was doing was just trying the best that he could, because he had some uncles that helped out, and but it's not the same. It's not the same as having a dad. And my dad was able to take the best of what his father taught him and tried to pass it on the best he could to us. And I talked to him about this, and at the end of the day, he said, Well, I still think it's true that the most important thing is that you know Jesus. And as frustrated as I am, I know he did the best he could. And so I agree with him. The most important thing is that I know Jesus. And so I'm trying to take my uh, lack, the lack of a father who knew all the stuff that a son should know, and figure some of that out and pass it on, because there's a lot of kids that don't have fathers. There's a lot of kids that have fathers that don't know how to be good dads, and it's hard because it's not something I feel good at, and uh, it's not natural to me. But I think back at the experiences that I had and why they weren't so great. So the ministry school I went to, it was very much into hierarchies, and they had a philosophy there with a big youth ministry, like probably about 700 kids, and their philosophy was that the leaders would go into the schools, the local high schools, and they would be friends with the head cheerleader and the college quarterback, and get the college quarterback and the head cheerleader to come to the youth group, and then all the other kids would follow them, and the youth group would be full, and it would be great. And that philosophy was more or less fleshed out in similar ways in other areas, to the point where, as students being there, and I was introverted, and it takes me a while to feel comfortable enough to start to speak up in a situation. I like to sit back. I like to see what's going on, make an informed decision. But what I noticed is that those people who would speak up or would say, I'm good at that, put me in charge of that, they would get it. They would get the opportunity. And honestly, there's a lot of people that weren't that great at stuff, but they had never been told so, and nobody was doing enough critical thinking to really step back and assess that. But what I noticed was that there was as much frustration as I had not being picked, and I wasn't picked to be mentored, and I wasn't picked to get to like participate in any special groups or anything like that. I was pretty much ignored. But there was some other people that were ignored, and they had less than I did. And I saw the same thing in the youth group. There were some kids that nobody was going to talk to. And, as much as I wanted somebody to come and help me out, I could see at least I can help that person out, because they're worse off than I am. And so when it comes to my philosophy of friendship, when I go to a party, I always look for that person who's by themselves, because I know at least that person's not going to tell me to leave and beat it, and if I ask them questions about themselves, maybe they will share something that I can relate to, and we can have a conversation. And it's not something I love doing. It's effort every single time, but at least I know I'm kind of improving the situation when I do that. So when it gets to coming around this corner and all that stuff, all this is to say, I think I came in. Now, and this is the other thing. This is the introvert trick. So if you're an introvert, you listen more than you talk. You pay attention to what's going on. You let other people make the mistakes. You let other people take the lead and see how it goes. And then you can wait for an opportune moment, step in, and really impress people by doing a good job. I used to do that like with public speaking, with plays when I was a kid. I was always in drama and acting, and did it by playing music and things like that. I'm really actually very comfortable on the stage. I guess the fact that it's sort of acting or whatever makes it easy. So maybe in some ways that's what I did when I talked to Paul. I was trying to be honest. I was trying to share my authentic self to a certain degree. But I wasn't really being honest about the fact that I was in there thinking that I had something to contribute, thinking that I had something to share, something that nobody else was talking about, something nobody else was mentioning. And maybe that was the case. But really, I came into this space because I needed friends. And I needed people that would care about me and love me and appreciate me. And you know, there's a lot of ways that we find people like that, and some of it is based on things that we're interested in, things like sports or books or woodworking. And it's like, I can have conversations all day long with my coworkers because we have the same job and we do the same things, and it's a good time, because we'll share about how this or that person was an annoying homeowner, or we'll share different creative solutions to problems and different ways of doing things, and we'll talk about life and we'll talk about who had a nice vacation and things like that. And that's good, and I'm glad to have that. But it doesn't feed my soul, and it doesn't make me a more loving person necessarily, or whatever. And so, there's a relationship that I'm craving that it's tough to get. But it really comes down to the what is the interest that's the most at the core. And I think this is the thing where ultimately, I think my dad was right, because the most important thing in my life is that I've encountered Jesus, and that I know him, and that I know him in a personal way. And whatever, he can accuse me of being like the cheesy evangelical message from the 90s and whatever, like about having a personal relationship with Jesus. But when I read the Gospels and I see the things that he says and the things that he does, and when I read the other parts of the Bible too, and even Paul and his epistles, I can tell he knew Jesus in an intimate way, despite what Jacob thinks. And when I read that, I see the same person who has met me in the places where I was most desperate and most needy and most broken and wounded. And I think about this. So I'm really named after my dad, and my name is Michael, but my dad's name is it's Thomas, and ever since he became a Christian, he goes by TJ, his initials. He says he met anybody he meets them through Jesus, so that's what TJ stands for, through Jesus. But my name is Michael Louis Thomas Sartori, and it's Michael Louis Thomas because when my grandfather would get angry, my dad and his brothers would have to wait until the third name to figure out who he actually meant, because, and I always thought, oh, I'm not going to do this, but I'm doing it now, especially now with 3. I'm mixing up my daughter's names all the time, which is, I don't know, I guess it's just inevitable. But so I'm named after my dad when he was in trouble, because that's when he was not just Tommy, but Michael Lewis Thomas. Thomas was the one he was looking for. And I think about that, Thomas is the saint who doubted. And I have that skeptical streak in me. And that's part of the thing of being introverted. I don't jump up and say, "Sign me up." I'm skeptical. I want to wait and see. And when Thomas wasn't sure, he knew that Christ was claiming to be God. And if Christ is God, could not he appear with his flesh fully healed and glorified? Yet what Jesus said to Thomas was, "Here, place your hands in my wounds." And what I've come to see is that that's the place where we encounter God. We find him in our wounds. And somehow when we're wounded, our wounds connect to his wounds. And that's how we know him. And so the ultimate litmus tester, if somebody can be a friend that not just is fun to talk to, fun to hang out with, but the people that I need in my life to help me get through, to help me go forward, are the people that know my best friend, and they know him by his wounds. And despite the things I said about that ministry program, I remember I was on a missions trip, and we went to Swaziland in Africa, and my roommate was with me, the most southern redheaded kid from Alabama, used to watch Benny Hinn at lunchtime on the TV every day, and he would eat dry spaghetti sitting in his bunk bed. He's a weird guy. And then there was this kid from Philadelphia who had been a drug addict and barely knew Jesus before he ended up in this program. And this Hispanic kid from Chicago. And then there was these African people who lived there, and some of them spoke English. And the thing is that on the surface, I didn't have anything in common with any of these people, really. They did not have the same upbringing. They did not have the same experience. But they had all had the same encounter with the same person in Jesus. And the level on which I could call them friend is way deeper than anything I can have with somebody who's read all the same books, watched all the same movies, roots for the same sports teams, and likes the same bands and all that. It's way deeper than somebody being Italian American or being from Boston or New England or any of that stuff. And so that's the level that I really want to meet people on. But if somebody doesn't know that, I still want to be your friend. And I want to introduce people to that friend. So I guess you could say I have an ulterior motive for being on YouTube, and maybe it more or less belongs on boring Christian YouTube and not so much in this little corner. But that's I want to meet people and make friends, because either you know my best friend or you need to know him, and I want to introduce you to him. So that's why I'm here. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm looking for. So thanks for watching.